Okay, everyone, good evening for the second time. Hopefully this is all working, you can hear us. This is Trolling with Logic for the 15th of February 2014. It's 7 p.m. in the UK, 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the States. We're a weekly show on science, secularism, philosophy, all that kind of good stuff. And just to let you know, you can call in at any point tonight, just add the Skype contact. The Skype contact Trolling with Logic. Send me a little PM with a gist to your question, and we'll add you in due course. And just as a reminder that the show is uploaded and recorded for later viewing, so by calling in, you grant us permission to use your likeness, so please no funny stuff with DMCAs. And on that note, that the recording of this show is public domain, so feel free to copy, share it, distribute it, whatever way you feel like it, just as long as you link back to us as a courtesy. And that's all the announcements out the way. So for a second time tonight, welcome, Kirch. How are you doing?
Hey everybody, I'm doing well.
All right. And Sheila, back after a long break.
Yes, glad to be back. Hello, everyone.
And yes, it's quite appropriate that we got a woman named Sheila back on the show, given our guest. He's an Australian-born political commentator now based in Los Angeles. He's written articles for Slate, and amongst that, he's written a whole load of really interesting books. There's Jesus Lied, He Was Only Human, God Hates You, Hate Him Back, Quran Curious, A Guide for Infidels and Believers, and his latest book is Crucifying America. So, everyone, please welcome to the show, CJ Werleman. How are you doing?
Good, mate. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and thanks for putting up with our little technical glitch at the start.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. As usual, Sheila seems to have a knack for this, so we'll let you get on with the introductory questions, because I'm pretty sure some of our audience may not have heard of CJ either. So.
Excellent, thank you. CJ, why don't we go all the way back to the beginning? What got you interested in politics, specifically politics in the U.S.?
Yeah, good question, Sheila. I've always been obsessed with America. Ever since the moment that my parents bought me a Beach Boys album, which was my first album, the big vinyl, when I was about 6 or 7 years of age. And I've always dreamed of living in America. I've always been fascinated with US politics. And my dad's hero was JFK. So I always, I looked through American politics through the prism of obviously his eyes in the early days, and just became enraptured in it. So it was always something I wanted to do. Well, I started writing about religion, and specifically breaking down the ancient texts, whether it was the Bible and the Old Testament, New Testament, and the Quran, which I covered in my first 3 books. But my latest book, Crucifying America, The Unholy Alliance Between Wall Street and the Christian Right, it takes a real close examination of the dynamics in US politics, and that's led on to other things. I'm now a columnist for Salon.com and Alternet, and I sort of commentate on the prevailing political arguments as they're happening at the moment.
Okay, excellent. I guess why would you? I mean, understanding all of that, why would you focus on the U.S. but not? I mean, do you get involved in politics in Australia at all? Do you?
I don't. I'm actually, I'm really almost apolitical when it comes to Australian politics. And it's interesting. A lot of my close friends, would like to have a bit of banter when it comes to Australian politics, particularly friends in Australia. But Australian politics doesn't have the colour or the excitement. I mean, the political debate in this country, it's the show, where this is the NBA of politics.
Yeah, I think, just to interrupt there, it's there's a YouTuber called Coughlin, and he said when he watches like US elections, it's basically like watching wrestling promos all the time, which is quite a good analogy for it.
Yeah, no, that's a good metaphor. British politics and Australian politics are very similar. We have the same, we use the Westminster, political system, and because we have mandatory voting in Australia in particular, you don't have politics on the extreme fringes. Whereas America, because you have, voluntary voting, the political debate in America is all about ginning up the base. And when you gin up the base, you get all sorts of colour and excitement in political discourse, and that's what makes American politics so enthralling and also so unique.
Where would you put yourself on the? I mean, I've kind of watched some of your videos and followed you a little bit. Where would you put yourself, sort of on the political scale? You kind of come off somewhat central on most things. Is that accurate?
I'm definitely left on a lot of things. You know, I like to on issues. Like to consider myself a centrist, but I guess I'm a centrist on the American political scale. But I'm definitely a liberal. I believe in the role that the government has a role to play, not alongside the free markets. I think America has gone too far to the extreme right, and even you got one party which is wants to destroy government wherever it can find it and turn the country into a nihilistic, pro-corporate third world. But the Democratic Party has been made weak. I'm probably way more to the left than what the Democrat Party is in this country.
What do you find is your most frustrating thing about American pie? I mean, for some people, it's the corporations owning it, or like a religion injecting too much into it. What would you say is the most frustrating thing for you when it comes to covering it?
Well, my biggest frustration with U.S. politics would be that it's no longer a democracy. This is the paradox. It's not a democracy anymore. It's it's wholly an oligarchy or a plutocracy. Where only the 0.01% of the population actually has any influence over political debate. I mean, the Republican Party is completely the representative arm of the top 0.1%, and then the Democratic Party are just about useless or completely inept. So there's no one. You could argue that the Democratic Party probably represents the top 20%. As opposed to the top 0.1% of the Republican Party, but that the bottom 80% of this country have no say in the political debate, have no say over political policy, and can't afford lobbyists, and can't shape the political debate at all. And that's not going to happen until you have a campaign finance reform, and you change a whole host of initiatives.
Sorry, I was going to have a question. It's just a curious one. Like, were you also surprised when Obama got elected the first time? Did that come as a shock to you?
No. It didn't come to shock me. It comes to a shock to me whenever a Democrat doesn't win the White House, because demographics run completely against the Republican Party. The Republican Party's only won one popular vote in the last 7 elections. In this last 7 national elections. So I wasn't surprised that he was going to win. Democrats should always win the White House. The only way Republicans can win is by completely suppressing the vote, or having a very, very low turnout election where people are totally disengaged, like it was the case in 2000 when George Bush won the White House. That was the lowest turnout of any election in the last 30 or 40 years, I think, from record. The frustration is that another frustration is the fact that Democrats are able to win the White House, but they're not. It's winning the state, and it's winning races at the state and local level, which the far right is very focused on, and liberals don't meet the enthusiasm of the far right when it comes to anything below the presidential election. And what we're seeing is, whilst Americans lean left in poll after poll, whether it's abortion to the death penalty, to gun control, or worker rights or equal rights, these states have been governed by far-right ideologues, and North Carolina is a classic example of that. It's a state that's about as purple as a state gets, but the far-right have completely hijacked all three, the lower house and the upper house, and also the governor mansion for the first time in 150 years. Now that state has been turned into, a pro-corporate theocracy in some links.
Okay, Sheila, you had a question.
What got you?
Oh, sorry, Kitch, you go ahead.
Sorry. What inspired you to write on religion and religious topics?
I guess what first, I mean, I've always been interested in religion. You know, I had a number of my close friends who became born again evangelicals for a period where there was sort of mass brainwashing happening in a community that I lived in, which was about an hour north of Sydney. So I always had it. My best friend who I grew up with, his family were very fundamentalist Christians, and but then the turning point was, living in Indonesia for a decade in 2005, where we witnessed the twin suicide bombings on Jimbaran beach in Bali, and that was certainly a moment in my life that sent through the proverbial shockwave, and that really made me want to deep, a lot further into extreme. What is in these? Wanted me to explore what is contained within these biblical or ancient texts, which would want to make a person strap C4 to themselves and blow themselves into a million pieces, and taking with them, innocent women and children.
Sheila.
And your style of... Sorry.
Kitch, you go ahead. No, sorry, you go ahead, Kitch.
And just to follow up, your writing style seems to be more of... you want to highlight the ludicrousness of the idea, but to get people to laugh at these ideas, rather than maybe some are more like Hitchens, where he'd be more. What made you just go down that kind of writing? Yeah, bombastic. Sorry.
Yeah.
Today. What made you want to go? What made you go down this particular style of writing? Is it just your personality coming out into the book, or is it just a conscious decision?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of I'm a smart ass by nature. I can be quite combative when it comes to argument, but there's probably an overabundance of smarter than thou atheism books on the market. And I think Dawkins, and as you alluded to, Hitchens, their writings, come across, I'm a know-it-all and you're an idiot for not knowing this. Whilst I share that view, I think my writing is, hopefully opens the door to people who go, okay, well, I'm not going to agree with what he says, but I'll give it a go because I might have a chuckle along the way. So I guess that my sense of who I am sort of lends well to that type of writing.
Yeah. It was just on that note, the titles of some of your books, because I've been speaking to my friends, and then they were asking about the show, and when they heard the title, some of them, those titles are a bit provocative. Is that a conscious choice on your part? You try and just get the attention so they'll maybe take it on board? I mean, something like God hates you, hate him back. I mean, that is quite a, an attention-grabbing title as it is. Yeah, well, the inspiration for that title came from the Lethal Weapon movie franchise, and there's a conversation, I think, in the second Lethal Weapon 2, and Mel Gibson's character is talking to Donnie Glover's character, and Donnie Glover says, I think God hates me, and Mel Gibson says, well, do what I do, hate him back. So that's where the inspiration for that title came from. It lends well to what the content is, and then God hates you, hate him back is basically the Bible, broken down. So chapter 1 of God hates you, hate him back is Genesis, and chapter 66 is the book of Revelation, which is what the Bible is. So I go through each chapter of the Bible and basically don't try to disprove the existence of God, because that's a fool's argument, but I go to demonstrate that if the God of the Bible were to be true, then this is one evil prick and someone we should be hostile to, rather than embracing as an all-loving, sentient being. Sheila, you've been waiting with a question for a while, I think.
It was more back to the politics. With everything that you have issue with American politics, if you could change one thing that you think would have the most effect here, or do the most good, what would it be? It'd be a split between two. Campaign finance reform. Any hope that America had of retaining a Jefferson
democracy was lost the moment that Citizens United, or the moment in the Supreme Court in 2010 awarded in favour of Citizens United over the Federal Electoral Commission. That was the moment that the Supreme Court said, well, money equals free speech and corporations equal people. That has seen, whereas whilst there's always been big donors, from the donor class, the CEOs of Wall Street and so forth, it's always been out in the open, and therefore companies would shy away from publicly promoting one party or the other for fear of alienating potentially half of their customer base. But when the Citizens United basically opened the way for all this anonymous donation, so basically, corporations have complete control of policy now. I think if you look at the 2012 election, what was it? 99% of all, or 99.7% of all political donations came from just 12,000 donors. Out of a population of 350 million. So that has to be either repealed or we have to return back to public financing. But I think that the shortest way of getting things back on track is mandatory voting. With mandatory voting, you really do remove the extremism from the fringes. So political operatives can focus on appealing to centrist ideals rather than just trying to gin up the base to getting them out to vote while suppressing the vote of the other side. So those two measures would certainly take power back from the top 1% and put it back with the people.
The voting thing was actually going to be my next question. One of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to politics is that the voter turnout is just so low. Like the presidential elections only get maybe modestly half of the registered voting pool. In congressional elections are closer to a third. So, trying to get people to just educate themselves and get out and vote is definitely one of my biggest pet peeves, especially women, because even in the turnout, the women who turn out to vote is even half of, whatever the turnout ends up being. So I guess my next question was going to be, how would you try and persuade people to actually get out and vote? But if you're all for mandatory voting, and I know there are a lot of countries that do it. UK does that, doesn't it, Cal?
No, it doesn't. But it was to add to you, that's also something happening in the UK, that women's interest in politics is very low here. I mean, at every election, I can speak to some women at my work, and they just, I don't do politics. It's nothing to do with me.
Right.
And some of them will just outright say, my husband does that. I don't bother with it.
Or they'll vote the same way their husband does, it's frustrating. It's especially when in this country, a lot of the women that do turn out are for the extreme right. We're getting like Romney supporters, which just absolutely astounds me. I
think any woman that unless you're super wealthy, if you're a middle class woman or a lower economic class woman and you're voting for the Republican Party, it's cognitive dissonance of the highest order.
Yeah, definitely.
But if you've got $10 million in the bank, then knock yourself out.
Right, definitely. I guess how do you, or is it even part of your what you do? How do you try and get people to the polls? Do you bother with that at all?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is it's hard to. Obviously the Democratic Party is spending millions of dollars trying to widen the vote and broaden the vote. But you need a Republican Party on the other side. It's spending millions of dollars trying to suppress the vote. I mean, the Republican Party now has in 33 states 92 bills trying to suppress the vote, through Jim Crow era style voter ID laws and such. So, and the other thing that the Republican Party, their whole campaign is to basically make the whole electorate disillusioned. That's why shutting down the government and making Washington totally dysfunctional is their tactic. They don't want Washington to work because they're the party that says that government isn't part of the solution. So when the public just goes, Washington doesn't work, there's government dysfunction, then they become the big winners out of that because they're the anti-government party. So it's, when you've got, so much corporate money and vested interest, which is spent on making people disillusioned or, dissuading people from turning up to the polls, it's a very, very hard fight. And the other thing is, most Americans are completely disengaged now from politics. In my parents' generation, they fought for civil rights. Even though my dad spent 10 years here in the US, but that generation, they fought for civil rights. They fought for women to vote, and you name it. They fought for environmental laws. The formation of the EPA. Which was under President Nixon, a Republican. But today's generation have become so dumbed down and so disengaged from political debate, and it's by design, by vested interest in the form of big money, that it's very hard to drag people to the polls. Now, by forcing them to vote, well, that's the only way forward, I think.
I was going to say, one of your main interests as well is how the Christian, basically the evangelical vote, got entangled. It's basically now part of the Republican. Can you just give us a little background on how you think all that came about? How they went so in bed with each other? Yeah,
well, it's, millennials can be forgiven for believing that, the Christian right, has been a dynamic within the American political landscape since forever, but it really still is only a relatively new dynamic in American politics. I mean, prior to the election of Reagan in 1980, no political figure in America declared himself to be a born again. That was as rare as a politician today declaring himself an atheist. It just didn't happen. And the irony is that that President Carter, a Democrat, was a Southern Baptist preacher. And then when Reagan contested the 1980 election against Carter, the moral majority became, much like an Ayn Rand movement, and the moral majority was formed, by Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and Billy Graham, to a lesser extent. They've formed a coalition of anti-gay, anti-ACLU, anti-same-sex marriage coalition to block the re-election of Jimmy Carter, who again was a Southern Baptist preacher, to then put their weight behind Ronald Reagan, who was a divorced Hollywood actor. Irony much. So I mean, when Reagan was elected, and it was the moral majority which morphed itself to the Christian right, they basically put Reagan into the White House, and until that time, that caught political commentators off guard. There's if you Google the Washington Post, the article read that nobody saw this coming, that the far right or the Christian right would play a meaningful role in U.S. politics. So that became, social conservative movements became all the more powerful after that, and and then you had Pat Robertson in the 96 election cycle, contested a Republican primary, and at one stage, he won Iowa and he won South Carolina. He almost went on to win the Republican primary, but the establishment candidate, Bob Dole, went on to win the nomination in the end. But ever since then, they've played an active part and become the most reliable and agitating voting bloc in the Republican Party. That's why you're seeing today, in today's civil war in the Republican Party, the establishment wing, whilst they might still have the most money, they don't have the voters. Then they really depend on that evangelical vote, that evangelical vote when it comes to primaries and also, statewide elections.
Yeah. And just to welcome our latecomer, Marty, how are you doing?
I am fine.
All right. And are you going to follow up on that point there, Sheila?
No, go ahead.
All right. It was another one question. You also wrote a book, Quran Curious, like a guide to the Quran. Was that any more difficult to write about than the Bible one? Was there more research involved? Like, I've always been curious, because it's something I always hear from is you got to read all the hadiths, you got to read this, and you got to understand Arabic before you get a good understanding. Did you find that? Did you have to go through all that yourself?
I kind of I found it easy because the approach I took was more, for lack of a better word, a simplistic approach. I basically just wanted to tell the Quran through the eyes of Muhammad, and to highlight that Christian neoconservatives, when they cherry pick passages out of the Quran, and people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, when they say, look how bad Islam is, and they take a passage out of the Quran to underscore their argument, as will the Israeli lobby and AIPAC and so forth. Well, they're just as guilty as Al-Qaeda terrorists who cherry pick passages out of the Quran to give meaning to it, because the Quran wasn't meant to be a book to live on and on and on. I mean, you really have to look at the Quran through, I always tell people, through the same lens as you would look for Mel Gibson's character in the movie Braveheart, which is a documentary about Scotland, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Completely one on. That's, yeah.
And,
This is me dressed up right now. So.
And Muhammad was just an ordinary guy who was victimized by the elite in Mecca. He was thrown out of Mecca, and he fled to the smaller town of Medina. And Medina was a city which had fallen into corruption, and was a city civilization falling in on itself. And he brought the people, made the society, which was a small town, rallied the town. But then the Meccans were determined to exterminate. The Meccans were, polytheists, pagan worshippers and so forth, and they didn't like Muhammad's monotheistic approach. They didn't like that he was, taking on the same Jewish God. It was obviously the Hebrews had, and so they were determined to annihilate him, and they were a far more militarily superior force than the Medanites, and so he would. You basically have to read the passages in the Quran when he says, make hell for the unbelievers, hell, shall be their home. That's Muhammad speaking to his small army, like, shit, we're about to be attacked by a far more superior force. Guys, we're going to prep yourself for battles. We're going into war, fight to the death, fight to the last man. So when the Al-Qaeda takes these passages out and says, make hell on the unbelievers, it's got nothing to do with the United States. So, the US wasn't even a country in the 7th century. So it has nothing to do with the US or Christians or Jews for that matter. Muhammad lived peacefully with the Jewish population at that time. So I just wanted to show it that this is an ordinary guy trying to survive against, greater odds, a house that was stacked against him. And, you see it more, the Quran more for a humanistic light, I think.
Yeah. Just another quick, which did you get more flack for, your books on the Bible or the Quran? Did you get a lot of flack for the Quran one at all?
I got a lot of flack from the Quran. Oh. I got a lot of flack from the Quran book from, readers and supporters of mine. All right. Because they said I copped out, or they said that, I think my readers were looking for me to be as to ravage the Quran as much as I ravaged the Bible. Yeah. I think they were looking more, whereas I took, I basically tried to, as I said, how I explained it, but also tried to show the political influences in Washington, which shape an anti-Islam narrative, which which suits the military-industrial complex, and also the Israeli lobby. The political forces behind the scenes, which whip up these anti-Islam debates. You had the mosque at Ground Zero debate, which got very which crazily got out of hand, and that was AIPAC and the military-industrial complex, and Fox News, which whipped up a phony debate, and atheists jumped all, like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins jumped all over it in support, and they just were being stooges, for this far-right neoconservative agenda.
Yeah, because I was going to bring that up, that I looked through the reviews on Amazon, and they were a lot more scathing about Quran Curious, and it was kind of that tone that you'd kind of chickened out of. But I think you were just writing it from a different angle, that book, really. Yeah,
no, my readers hated, my readers or fans, for lack of a better, they hated Quran Curious.
All right. Marty, you've just come in, so have you?
No, just
You just need to listen a little.
just go on.
Right, Sheila or Kitch? Yeah.
How much do you think the American politics actually hinders progressivism in the Middle East and trying to reduce the number of fanatics?
Yeah, America's never going to do it. That's a great question. It's a multi-layered question.
I wish I'd thought of that one.
Yeah, I mean, America, it's torn between, Israel makes America's policy very complicated in the Middle East. The classic example of that is Egypt, during the Arab Spring. Now, of course, America publicly would like to see democracy in the Middle East, even though we prop up, despotic leaders throughout the region, and not just there, but also in South America and the likes. But Egypt is also an ally, even though Egypt is an oppressive military regime prior to the Arab Spring. They still, were the first Arab country to sign a peace declaration with Israel. So whilst we want democracy, we also want to protect, we overly protect Israel's interests. So, we give $4 billion. We basically give $4 billion of aid per year to Egypt, which is basically a bribe that says we'll give you this $4 billion every year if you promise not to invade Israel. So it's been very hard to promote, democratic regimes who wish to overturn these military juntas, because we're like saying, well, we're paying you money not to invade Israel, but now we're going to support, the opposition force that wants to throw you out. You can't have it both ways. So that's why it's complex. Will there be support of progressive? I'm going to be shot for saying this, but the Middle East, a lot of these Middle Eastern countries don't know what democracy is. Democracy is purely a Western thing. We're trying, when Egypt, the Egyptians, definition of democracy is not exactly what ours is. And with all the sectarianism that you have in these countries, which were, Egypt is just about the only real country in the Middle East. All of these other countries are drawn up with fictitious borders, around sectarian tribes. I don't know how you, find a peaceful long-term solution which, lends its well to democracy in the long run.
That was something that I had a teacher at some point. I can't remember what subject it was. It wasn't related to this, but we were talking about the situation in the Middle East, and basically he was taking the position that it's never going to happen because they just apparently don't get it for whatever reason, this whole democracy thing. And it's just, if you look at how America and then most European nations became democracies, it was just, it happened from within.
Yep.
And now basically it's the West trying to enforce democracy on the people in the Middle East in some way, I guess. Rather than it's not some grassroots movement that gets going and grows until the politicians and whatever, the dictators basically have to surrender power or get killed.
Well, but also too, when democracy started, in the US with the founding fathers, who were, men of enlightenment, and they understood that, well, they were deists, they weren't even Christians technically, most of them, and they understood the importance of separation of church and state. Whereas in these countries, democracy runs counter to, Islam, in many ways. So whilst you have secular movements in these Arab countries, and you have large secular movements in a lot of them, but the problem is when it goes to a vote, when you get all these democratic parties and it goes to an election, then the conservative Egyptian is going to vote for the pro-Islam party, and that's why you had the Muslim Brotherhood winning election the first time around there. So democracy ends up putting a a theocratic regime back into power, and once they're back in power, well, then then bye-bye democracy.
Right.
Yeah. Richard, Sheila, you can come in there.
I do have a question. What is your? It seems currently that the U.S. is trying to get involved in stuff that's happening in the Ukraine. What's your position on that?
Yeah, what it is the U.S. is there's a great book. It's called the Next 20 Years, and it basically takes all the future modeling. You know, all these think tanks in Washington, they're always doing this predictive modeling on what geopolitical landscape is going to look like 20 years out, 50 years out, and 100 years out, and one of these think tanks, which led to this book, The Next 20 Years, predicts that the next major conflict, or the next world war, in inverted commas, will be between the West and Russia, and that Russia's sense of security is defined by how much distance it has between itself and Western Europe. But since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia have come into the Western fold, and Russia is petrified that it's going to lose access not only to these buffer zones between itself and Western Europe, but also access to oil and gas, in the former stans and so forth. So it puts Russia on a military edge whenever one of these former Soviet states joins NATO. By joining NATO, and then if there's any conflict, then the US is dragged into it. And what we saw in Georgia in 2008, during the middle of the Olympic Games, when Russia invaded Georgia for a little over 2 weeks, was basically Russia putting up a test balloon to say, we want these Cold War states back, and we're going to take them back by force. This is our test run. We're going to see what response comes back from the West. And when they went into Georgia, there was no response back from the West. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, America did nothing when it came to Georgia. What will it do if the shit hits the fan in Ukraine? I don't know. I suspect that if Russia really gets forceful and that's Putin's game plan is simple. He does want these states back, and he will take them back. Well, how will America react? I think America's appetite for war is gone. I think that these states will go back into the Soviet fold.
Yeah, because the problem is if Ukraine falls in, they're on Poland's doorstep, and that's a big player in the EU, which is a really big threat then.
Exactly, and Poland, well, Poland's obviously a NATO ally. So I mean, would they take? I don't think Russia would take Poland, but it's interesting anyway. Will it become another? Will it be a third world war? I mean, who knows? But I think we're a lot closer to that than what a lot of people would like to imagine.
Someone's asking, is Kazakhstan a big factor? And I would probably say no, just due to their location. And I've worked out there, and basically I think they're very kind of pro-Russia. Because they do feel very isolated from you just because of their location and that, and culturally as well. That's just a question that came up in the chat room there.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay, the Republicans, a lot of people are called their war on women. I mean, do you agree with that they kind of do seem to have a problem with women and women's rights?
Yeah, I mean, the Republican Party is obsessed with controlling. Okay. The Republican Party is, you got the plutocrats, which are the top 1%, and then you got Wall Street, but then you've got the party's base. Now the party's base, its voting base, is obsessed with controlling everything related to sex, controlling sex and religion. It just fits under their religious worldview. They really do believe that women should be in the household pregnant and in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant. And they believe any attempt to, give women reproductive rights is to do a deal with the devil. So yeah, I mean the you look at the moment, the Republicans led, which have urged the Hobby Lobby to take their case all the way to the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court rules in favour of the Hobby Lobby, it basically means corporations in this country have total right to discriminate against women and gay people and maybe minorities purely, and use religious belief as an excuse. So I mean that is hostile to women. I think that it's such a party of testosterone-filled men that this is a party that has to go through sensitivity training with political consultants on how to speak to women. Any time that you need to pay consultants on how to speak to women, you're losing.
Right, definitely. And it doesn't seem like women care enough to, kind of getting back to what we were talking about before, women just don't seem to care that everything that we need, or that, women of the past have worked so hard to get to, is slowly being taken away from us.
Yeah, I mean, look at. A classic example is you got a woman like Michelle Bachmann saying, that Obamacare is, the work of the devil. When she's saying this to her constituents, she's basically helping these red states not to, Obamacare is working beautifully now in the states where, blue states have enacted all the provisions of the Affordable Care Act. But in these red states, women had been denied access to healthcare through Medicaid, through the Medicaid expansion and so forth. I mean, that's completely hostile to women's needs and so forth, purely because they want to run this theocratic agenda.
Yeah. Well, I think it's mechanics. I don't know. I couldn't answer that quite. Mechanics saying, why do so many of these women seem to support basically misogynists? I can't figure that out as well.
Well, they're probably married to a misogynist, so it's
right, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like we said before, a lot of it's just women either just letting their husbands do the voting. It's a guy thing, so let them handle it, or voting the same way that their husbands would.
Yeah, exactly. And, and when they go into these evangelical churches and, they get to the chapter in Timothy where the Bible says, that the man is the head of the family and women are to remain silent.
Right. Well, and they seem to be trying to drag us kicking and screaming back to the 50s, and not in a good way either. It's just they want to put us back in the kitchen and rather than working, just have us taking care of the house like a good wife.
Yeah, exactly. And the irony is they do want to drag America back to the 50s, but the 50s was also the era of big government. So they got to be careful what they wish for.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's just saying that you mentioned this in your books, that there seems to be sort of two versions of Jesus. There's the Jesus of the Republican Party and there's the actual Jesus of the Bible. Can you just expand on the differences there?
Well, I mean,
wasn't he basically a communist?
Yeah, he was. I mean, Jesus was all about spreading the wealth around.
Yeah.
Jesus was a liberal Jew who gave away free healthcare and hung with a hooker. Now, the Republican Party has turned him into a union-busting, anti-environment, pro-corporate, representative of the top 1%. But basically, the Jesus of the Republican Party is Ayn Rand, and they've taken her philosophies, who ironically was an atheist, and turned her philosophies into Jesus' scripture. I mean, this evangelical movement has, Jesus was all about spreading the wealth, but these evangelical movements all about, this prosperity philosophy that, if you're poor, it means you're sinful. And Jesus rewards the righteous with, wealth and so forth. So that's why they worship the super rich on the far right, because they think, oh, if you got $10 billion, you must be really, really righteous. So you've got the Christian right, which votes against, extending, unemployment insurance, cutting, food stamps. I mean, can you imagine anywhere in the Bible where Jesus would have said, fuck off, this bread is mine, and get your own damn fish?
Yeah. All right, guys. Who's up with a question?
Just on the...
Oh, Kitch,
Oh, sorry.
you broke up a
Just
little.
on... Have I broken up?
No, you're back now. You broke up a little bit there.
Grand.
That's fine now.
Just on the topic of women's rights in America, do you think that Wendy Wright has any chance of winning in Texas?
Wendy Davis?
When you do.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Wendy Davis.
Wendy
Who the
Davis.
hell is Wendy Wright?
Wendy Wright's
Davis, yeah, sorry.
the woman that Richard Dawkins interviewed.
Oh God, no.
That's a big slip there.
No, but Wendy Davis, she certainly has a big chance of winning the gubernatorial race there. And I mean, a lot of political scientists predict that Texas will actually become a blue state by the 2020 election. Now, in the presidential elections. Now, so as much as you have the biggest nuts in America who reside in Texas, you also have a big progressive population. In fact, the city of Austin is a very progressive city in a very red state. I think she's running a very smart campaign too. She's running to the right. She's campaigning as a progressive, but she's campaigning a little bit to the right of center, which is smart. I mean, she's come out in favor of 20-week. A ban on 20-week abortions, which is, okay, that probably doesn't line up with most progressives, but it's smart politics, and I think that's what she has to do to win. So, yeah, I think she, the uphill battle she's going to face is, the Republicans are going to throw everything, every dime they have to spend in making sure she doesn't win, and ultimately money usually wins out in electoral politics here in the US.
Care to make any predictions on who you think's going to run in the next presidential election?
Well, I think Hillary is already running. I think she's already started her campaign. There's no doubt that Hillary's going to run, and if Hillary runs, she'll win. Unfortunately, it's not who I want to run or win. I think that we're the biggest challenge America faces right now is that of income inequality. I mean, the 95% of all games have gone to the top 1% in the last 10 years, and the disparity between the bottom 20% and the top 20% is wide as it's ever been in this country. You've got wage stagnation in the middle class. Middle class wages haven't risen in 30 years, and I think Hillary. Bill Clinton was an overrated progressive. He was far from a progressive. He was a centre-right president. I mean, he played a hand in destroying organised labour. He also, enacted pro-Wall Street policies. He was the one who signed into law the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which basically basically triggered, it was a sequence of events which led to the financial collapse we had in 2008. Hillary is all about Wall Street, and she's never said anything which has lent herself well to Labor and lend herself anything that would suggest she would be a fighter for the middle class. And she's paid $50,000 plate dinners for Goldman Sachs and the likes. I want Elizabeth Warren to run. I think she's a champion of middle class. She wants to break up the banks, and I think that's what America needs right now. I think if Hillary's the nominee, I won't be excited at all by the campaign. I think you're going to have Wall Street siding with Wall Street.
Do you think Warren has a chance with Hillary running?
Yes, I think she had. If Hillary runs, I don't think Warren will run, which is a sad thing. But I believe she could be Hillary. I mean, no one thought that Obama could beat Hillary in 2008. The only reason Obama did beat Hillary in 2008 is because of his vote, not his vote against the Iraqi war. And the Democratic primary in 2008 was basically a referendum on the war, and Hillary voted for the war, so that cost her the nomination. I think the same thing this time around. Warren, a junior senator, Obama was a junior senator. I think the stars are in alignment if she were to run against Hillary, because the progressives, are yearning or a true champion of progressive ideals, a true fighter for the middle class. They know that the Democratic Party has been hijacked by the Wall Street wing within the party, and they know that Hillary represents that wing. I think that she could win, but unfortunately I don't think she'll run if Hillary is the nominee.
Just kind of two questions coming off that. I mean, do you think like Hillary actually running for the nomination, that might energize women to vote? And also, how vicious do you think the Republicans will attack her just for being a woman running?
I don't think they can attack her for being a woman running, because they're going to have to prove they're not an anti-woman party to independents come the general election. If Hillary runs, she's unbeatable. You know, the Republicans do not have a candidate that can even come close to her. And Chris Christie had an outside chance, but he's completely imploded now, and the scandals surrounding Bridgegate are going to carry him, with him all the way to the election. And he won't win the nomination. I thought he only had an outside chance of winning the nomination. That is if everything aligned perfectly for him. But now he's going to have to withstand a mini primary within the Republican Party from other so-called moderates like a Jeb Bush or a Rob Portman or the likes. But now I think the Republican Party is going to coalesce around someone like a Rand Paul or a Mike Huckabee. So they're going to have a nincompoop who's going to, totally annihilate. And then the next election, the Democrats are probably going to win by the biggest landslide there's ever been in presidential electoral politics. That's my overall prediction.
Sheila, do you have something here?
I do. Does it seem to you like the Republicans just really don't want to hold office as president? I mean, it just kind of feels like they keep throwing away the election by bringing out people like Romney. I mean, who's so obviously against everything that against women, for example. It feels to me like they don't really want to be in the presidential chair.
Well, they really want to. The problem is the Republican Party is, it's basically what the Democratic Party was in the 80s. The old adage, I don't have a political party, I'm a Democrat. Well, now it's, I don't have a political party, I'm a Republican. The Tea Party, which is basically the Republican base, has now taken over the party. They don't control the money, but they control the party's base. And the only reason Romney won the nomination, and Romney is still a so-called moderate compared to the other whackabirds on that side of the fence. The only reason he won is because the radical nuts couldn't decide. If they had just picked one Rick Santorum or one Michelle Bachmann or one Herman Cain, one of those nuts, instead of spreading around evenly amongst all of them, then one of those nuts would have won the nomination. I think what you'll see in 2016 is that they're going to pick a nutbag early that sounds and looks like them, and they're going to stick with it. And that's probably going to be a Rand Paul or a Ted Cruz or a Mike Huckabee.
Right.
So getting back to your question, the person who appeals to the Republican base doesn't appeal to the general election, and but they believe the reason, this is how loony these guys are. They believe the reason they lost in 2008 and 2012 is they didn't pick someone conservative enough.
Is there anyone more conservative, honestly?
You have to be severely conservative. You've got to be Joe McCarthy-like.
Right.
Do you think there's any possibility of a third party emerging in the States in the future?
American politics doesn't lend itself to that. The sheer amount of money involved and just how, just the way the primary processes are set up and so forth. I think the Republican Party is going to become so extreme, and they will break away into a third party within themselves, get absolutely annihilated in one or two elections, and then they'll come back and form again under the one party. But I think the myth of there's a certain mythology around a third party is going to save the day in American politics. That's just it's not going to happen. And what's going to happen is it ends up just making the parties even more extreme. Rather than appealing to centrist policies.
Yeah, we've had an independent party trying to get into, better positions in politics for more than 20 years now. And they just, I mean, what do we have? Less than a handful that are actually holding any sort of position. I don't see it happening either.
Yeah, and what it does, it just basically hands the other side an election win. I mean, as much as I like Ralph Nader, and Ralph Nader, was a lot more liberal than what Gore was. And as a true progressive, you should have supported Nader over Gore. But the problem is, man, it handed the election to a far-right conservative in the form of George Bush, and therefore, you don't get all your. Not only do you get zero of your liberal, you don't get some of your liberal wants. You get none of them. So it's and that same thing happened in the '92 election for the Republicans. What was it? The crazy Texan guy who cost George Bush the election.
Yeah, what was his name?
Oh my
God. I can picture him too, just a little, really fast talking. Ross Perot, yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, Marty, do you have any?
Not really.
Right.
Politics is not my thing.
Yeah.
There was a question asked earlier.
Yeah, you go ahead with it.
Somebody asked, I wonder what would happen if we decided to make a voting system where you have to earn the right to vote with significant standards, military service, public service, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Republicans would like that. I mean, that goes back to the old days where all these millionaires are coming out now saying you should own a property, and that was the electoral law, 200 years ago in this country. You had to own property to vote. I think anything that eliminates people from voting or makes it even harder for people to vote is anti-democratic in itself. I think voting should be to cast a vote should be as easy as purchasing something online or voting for the winner of American Idol. You should be able to SMS with the technology you have today. You should be able to SMS your vote in, and be done with it. I think expanding it is better, not shrinking it.
Yeah, because there's that thing in the UK right now, you probably know about it, that there's more people voting for X Factor than there are in our general elections here now. Which is it's funny and it's kind of distressing as well. That
it is distressing. I mean, it's we are dumbing down, and that's what the wealth in power wants us to be. They want us to be disengaged, because by being disengaged, we're not able to fight for the middle class or the lower class. Then the tax code becomes reflective of that. And by being disengaged, the tax code is, spreads the wealth from the poor to the top.
Okay, just to let everyone know, we're coming up for the final 30 minutes. So chat room, if you do have your questions, just try and fire them through to us, because we do have a question, and I think Marty, you can read it out. Okay. We always pick on the quietest person on the show.
Given that the religiously unaffiliated or nuns, hang on, shoot, I lost it. Did you put it in the chat here?
It's in Skype, yeah.
Given that the religiously unaffiliated or nuns are apparently the fastest growing group in America, what do you think the prospects are for an openly non-Christian president in the future?
Long time in the future. I mean, America, as I mentioned earlier, no matter what poll you take on the cultural issues in this country, Americans lean left. But to show you to give you an example of how far I think we are still from that. Got another mental block when it comes to names. The Massachusetts Congressman Barney Frank. 2 or 4 years before the end of his final term in U.S. politics and in the Congress, he came out as an open, came out of the closet as a gay person whilst he's still in Congress. Now, he didn't declare his lifelong atheism until 2 years out of office. So he was more comfortable in this country declaring himself to be a homosexual than he was, in non-belief of any religion. So that gives you an example of how unelectable someone is in this country by declaring atheism. I mean, an atheist still in this country is distrusted as pedophiles and rapists. I mean, that's just a sad truth. I mean, it's still, atheists still are the most, or the most persecuted or vilified group or demographic in this country, and studies, do prove that.
Yeah. I was going to ask, just from your impressions of the right wing in America, who are their bigger bogeymen, Muslims or atheists?
Equal.
Yeah.
I think Fox News perpetuates two fears constantly. It's the fear of Muslims and the fear of atheism. Atheism, they believe, will take us down the road of Stalinism, and Muslim is going to turn this country into an Islamic theocracy. I mean, every time Fox News mentions even the word atheism or Islam, 25 million people in the Deep South lock their front door.
Sorry, there was a question that was coming up there, and I've forgotten it already. All right, Sheila, I think you've got something there, do you?
Yeah, someone in the chat room keeps asking what the panel thinks about feminism. I can start with that one because I am a feminist. I just want to say that the ones that they refer to as the rad femmes or the real extreme feminists do not represent the opinions or the views of the majority of the feminists. So I'm just going to put that out there and then pass it off to you guys.
Yeah.
I just say I'm a humanist.
Yeah.
I don't care about gender or sexual orientation or disability or anything. I think all humans have the same values or the same rights and all that.
And as I'm Scottish, we just say "Don't be a dick." That's it. That's just our attitude. If you don't
That's
be a dick.
another way of phrasing it.
Yeah.
Right.
And Kirch, what's the Irish stance? Pretty much the same as the Scottish.
Actually, it's
Be
a combination of Martis and Zulus.
Yep. And with a few more.
Equal rights. Just
Yeah.
considering what's going on, Bob, with Ireland in the abortion debate, I would be very pro women's rights. Also, gay rights is coming. We actually will have the and a referendum to allow gay marriage next year. Actually,
So,
that's going to be.
Scotland legalised it last week, I think. Anyway, CJ, your opinion on the question before we.
So what was the question?
Just your opinion on feminism. I think it was just a general.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, obviously, all for it. I think the feminist movement is still needed because, as Obama said in his State of the Union speech, or pointed out in his State of the Union speech, is that, women in this country still only earn, 70 cents for every dollar a man earns. That we're in the 21st century. That's, unconscionable.
Yeah. So that's what my question was going to be earlier. I mean, do you find it strange, like how Americans, they can see across the border in Canada how secular liberal politics, it's working for them, but they still can't accept that it could work for them? Does that kind of baffle you at times? Like they've got an example just right on their doorstep of what it could be.
Yeah, well Canada is more or less a monolithic country, like Australia is, whereas America is two countries pretending to be one. Yeah. I mean, the Civil War didn't happen by accident. I mean, the Civil War happened because, it is two countries. America should be split, down the middle, in what is already an invisible border from the Mason-Dixon line, ending up in some Baptist church in rural Texas. The South in this country, it's whilst you got one half of the country trying to deal intelligently with, modern issues, whether it's climate change or, right down to electric cars or sensible gun control laws. You've got the other half of the country, which is steeped in ancient grudges and, Civil War ideology. Whilst you have that, it's hard for America to move in a progressive secular mind. I mean, the Republican Party today is basically the party of the old South. And this, Southerners have a disproportionate influence in the Republican Party because the states of the South are all monolithic red. with the exception of Florida maybe. And by being so monolithic red, it enables, their senior positions held within the Republican Party are held by Southerners. So it's I've forgotten the question, but I think I kind of answered it.
All right. We do have a caller lined up, so yeah, Marty, that's a good chance.
I think we can take this either really quickly or it's gonna branch into something. I played this role-playing game in the past. It was set in like a near future, so in other words, it's just people speculating. Where one of the things that had happened was the U.S. had basically split up because of all the differences you have there, and basically it started with basically blue and red states splitting into two separate nations. Do you think that's like possible, or what would happen if that happened?
So that's you guys ring. There's a great book by Chuck Thompson. It's called, and I quote his book one or two times in my book Crucifying America, and his book is called Better Off Without Him. It's the subtitle is A Northern Manifesto for Southern Succession, and that basically plays out a hypothetical of what the two countries would look like. You'd have, we get to keep, the northern states get to keep America and call it America, and the southern states can call it, their country Smith and Wesson, or the Confederate States of America, or Coca-Cola, or
Jesus
some other
land or something.
And it really runs, right through to what would happen with the military, currency, how other countries would trade with the two countries, and so forth. So yeah, it's a real good examination of how it would work. The biggest questions, I believe it would work. They could have, the Ten Commandments, blasted on every public building in the South as well. The question becomes over the military, because most of the major military bases are in southern states. So, that would be the biggest challenge in making it, not that this would ever happen, but it's an interesting exercise to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, just to let everyone know, we're featured on the front page of On, so if you're watching on the front page, feel free to come and join the chat. We are talking politics and religion, so not your kind of dinner chat going on here, but we do have a caller. So Benjamin, are you there?
Yes, can you?
Very quietly, can you turn up the volume on your microphone, please?
That's
it.
better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's better.
Perfect.
So you're on with CJ. Ask your question.
Right. I've been noticing a very large increase in so-called bandwagon skeptics. Basically, people who remember parts of arguments, and unlike more original skeptics, people who have come to the conclusion by themselves. We find, big pharma people among the skeptics community, and there's a much lower level of biblical literacy, and all of these things that used to really be. If you met a person who identified as an atheist or a skeptic, they would not just know the arguments because someone had told them the arguments, but they actually knew the pathway. You kind of have any feelings on that?
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure what the exact question is.
The increasing number of people who are more skeptics by popularity rather than actually being skeptics.
Okay, yeah, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, okay. I kind of understand your question. I would say that I think skepticism is being promoted also by big corporate interests, and that's why, if you look at the Republican Party today, they're totally scornful of facts or scientists or studies or anything, and they don't even believe political polls, when it shows that they're losing. Republicans were so convinced they were going to win the 2012 election that Romney hadn't even written a concession speech, because that's data, and data must always be wrong. When it comes to skepticism, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm a climate change skeptic." by thinking somehow that makes them seem smart, or they've cottoned onto something that everybody, some conspiracy that everyone else doesn't know, a conspiracy that's going to make Al Gore rich. But that skepticism, in inverted commas, is funded by big oil, and the oil and gas oligarchs like the Koch brothers here in the US. So you have all these pro-corporate lobby groups now in these think tanks, which basically all they do is publish and produce white papers, which these white papers are then picked up by bloggers and far right-wing media, for example, which throw skepticism on anything from climate change to evolution, and so forth. So yeah, I think there's an increase in the skepticism field, but I think it's not the skepticism that which is aligned with religious skepticism, as an example.
I was actually thinking of something I found quite a lot worse than that. I mean, people who legitimately identify as skeptics, who would, for example, like Martimus videos against spirit science and gurus and this kind of thing, and they would take the arguments from him, but they're sort of dogmatic in their approach rather than actually understanding the arguments.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I hate those guys.
I'd actually, at the risk of committing a no true Scotsman fallacy, skepticism is really, or skeptic is more of a title that's earned and not self-proclaimed, because skepticism is a process, not the actual conclusion you reach.
Of course, but it's more of an image from the outside that legitimate skeptics will be bundled together with these people who have some of these ideas, but outside of that, they're complete nutbags. They don't actually know why they reject or accept things.
Yeah, I think some of the worst for that are the Green parties. Strangely enough, and I support a lot of what they say, but a lot of them, they are just kind of repeating talking points. Like a lot of them don't know the actual data that backs up their position.
Yeah.
I say the Green movement is kind of, well, on both sides of the environmentalists, they're very bad for that. But I've noticed it. There's a question come up. Well, just like Benjamin, do you have any more questions?
No, thank you very much. It's a very entertaining stream, and you guys are doing a good job.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for calling in.
Yep, and none of the Norwegian-Swedish rivalry between Martin and our Swedish guest. No. Right, there was a question came up there, so again, Marty, as you're the quietest tonight, you get the chat room questions.
Where was is that the one Sheila posted?
Yeah.
Looking at what the Young Turks are trying to do, Wolfpack, never heard of it, they're trying to get money out of politics. Are people in general more aware of the problems with having private companies influencing political parties? And is there a growing group of people trying to combat this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a growing awareness which started with the Occupy movement. I mean, the Occupy movement basically put the top 1%, or where we are the 99%, those types of phrases into common vernacular now. I think whilst sadly the Occupy movement was short-lived, it did change the debate a little bit, and people started to become aware of not only income inequality, but also the overwhelming influence that special interests has in Washington. Is there an organized movement to combat it? Not really at the moment, because it comes down to money. How do you the Chamber of Commerce has what is there, something like 15,000 lobbyists now in Washington. I mean, there's Jack Abramoff, the defamed lobbyist who went to jail. He said something interesting. He said we would walk into a first-time congressional, a new congressional member's office. We'd sit down with them, and we'd tell them, as soon as you're done in Congress, we have a job waiting up for you. And the minute they nodded their head, that's the moment we knew we had them, and we could do anything that we wanted to. And that's why all these lobbyists that are running around Washington are actually former Congress people. So, how do you get the money out of politics? Well, a long way going towards that step is making voting mandatory. That blunts the influence big money has on politics to an extent, because you widen the base. You can't brainwash everyone to a certain ideological agenda.
Anyone else got a follow-up there? There was a question that was submitted before the show. It's from Jay. Unfortunately, she can't make it just due to the time difference in her location. Just to give you a little bit of background, Jay is kind of a regular caller to our show. She's an ex-Muslim, and she read your Quran Curious book, and her point was, well, I think it echoes very many. She thought her view is like fundamentalists they're the ones that are reading the Quran correctly. And so how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I'd say the opposite.
Yeah, right.
it sounds funny that I'm arguing with a Muslim about what the Quran says. I can appreciate that. Sounds awfully pretentious of me, but I mean the as I said, Muhammad wrote those, or recited those things for just a specific group of people, his people, in a specific period of time. And if you're reading what he wrote in that specific period of time, in those few years that he's under attack, and trying to apply it to the 21st century, then you're taking it out of context.
Yeah.
That would be the basis of my argument on that.
All right. Kitch or Sheila, do you have a follow-ups? Or any other questions? We're coming up for 8 minutes, so get any final questions in chat room, just fire them through and we'll try and get through them. Sheila, do you have something to say there?
Not really. Excuse me.
Sorry.
I think I got my questions fairly
all right,
well answered. So.
Kitch.
Sorry.
Today. Yeah, I was. No, it was just in general, how much do you think the American politics, well, there's the old saying that when America catches a cold, when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, I think it is. I mean, how true do you think that's still, like, for us in Europe, should we be really paying attention to the American politics? Like, how does it affect us?
I mean, I don't think that British or Australian or Europeans need to pay all that much attention to what happens within US politics. Obviously, as it approaches to trade or geopolitics, is certainly or geopolitics is, particularly when it comes to military use, is obviously a big one. I think America is a superpower that's going to remain unrivaled for another 100 years. Anyone who thinks everyone likes to use the Rome metaphor that America's at the end of its superpower reign. It's many people many people smarter than me would contend America's only at the beginning of its power. It's still a superpower that's learning how to walk. And when it comes to commerce, and as you said, America catches a cold. America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, which is often used, in financial markets terms. Particularly when people are talking about the stock market. Well, if we look at commerce, America's reign on the world is so tight and so strong that not a single boat can move on the world's oceans without America ever knowing about it or being able to do something about it. And when you control the shipping lanes, you control commerce. So, I think that America's influence on the UK and Europe and Australia is still, is going to be dramatic and significant for another 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Guys, anything else? We're just coming up to the end, so final questions if anyone does. I'll go and check the chat room what they're saying.
Yeah, I see there's someone who wants to call in.
Yeah, I'll just check the context. Kitch, you had something there.
Yeah, I'm just kind of I know what I want to say. I'm just trying to formulate it in a coherent way. How do you think that American politics should address the education system in America? Is there anything that should be that can be taken from other educational systems throughout the world?
They should start by creating one.
Yeah, I mean, this is what trickle down economics has done. One of the things that trickle down economics has destroyed is public education in this country. America, as America's public education system used to be the envy of the world. Now it's a joke. I mean, now it's deplorable, and it's by design. The Republican Party, it's all about just giving tax cuts for the rich, and then also by giving tax cuts to the rich, you cause massive budget deficits, and when you have massive budget deficits, the Republican Party then has an excuse to cut funding to social welfare programs and programs for the poor, but also to anything public education. Now, Republican Party is basically only operating for the interests for the rich and corporations. Now, anything which is a public utility is of no worth to the corporations, and in fact is in conflict or in competition with the corporations. So they want to be able to enable corporations to be able to profit from Americans from the cradle to the grave. And by defunding public education, some of the schools in America, they like the fact that these schools are falling apart, because then it becomes an excuse to take public funding away from these public schools and put them into these charter schools, which are schools which are for-profit schools owned by corporations. And so what we're going to have,
then you still get the problem: the poor people can't get educated, and that means the companies will have fewer people that are qualified to work for them. So it hurts the companies anyway.
No, not really. It's what's going to happen is you're going to have two-class system. You're going to have the haves and the have-nots. So if you're in the haves, you live in a gate-guarded community. Right. Your kids are going to go to a public school with all the best, resources and so forth. And then, or you're going to have, you're going to be living where there's no police force, where there's rampant crime, and your kids are going to a school where they have to pass gun metal detectors. And when they finally make their way past those gun metal detectors, they're going to end up in a classroom where the teacher is basically just on riot control. There's no teaching. And you're going to have this uneducated dropout rate, which is, going to climb in these public schools. But then the corporations have a large, big, endless supply of low-skilled, low-cost labor. And that's what the South has become. So you're going to have an educated elite to run these corporations, and then you're going to have this massive, cheap labor pool from, the uneducated masses.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think there's only just a few minutes left, so we'll start wrapping up now. And as always, CJ, we usually, at this point, we give our guest a soapbox moment. So if there's anything you want to promote or just any general thoughts, you've got your soapbox now.
Okay, yeah. No, well, yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It's been great, and enjoyed the questions, enjoyed the discussion. I guess if people want to know more or follow me, my writing, I'm a columnist for Salon and Alternate. I usually have a weekly piece on both of those sites. On Twitter, they can follow me at CJ Werleman. And as you mentioned before, my most recent book is Crucifying America, the unholy alliance between the Christian right and Wall Street. And that and all my other books, including God Hates You, Hating Back, can be found on Amazon, which is probably the best place to download or buy my book, the paperback versions.
Yeah, just very quickly, do you have any books in the pipeline you can maybe give us a sneak peek?
Yeah, I'm working on at the moment. The working title is Resurrecting America. So whilst Crucifying America was basically showing how the Christian right has ushered in all these economic policies which have destroyed the country and destroyed the middle class, Resurrecting America will be something which is forward-looking, looking to how America can reclaim its middle class and reclaim what was a country which was the envy of the world rather than the scorn.
Okay, just to let everyone know, I've put in all the links to CJ's website and his Twitter there, so go and check them out for more information. Marty, your final thoughts?
I don't like politics.
All right, Sheila.
Well, thanks for coming on. It was great to get a chance to talk to you. As always, you can find me here and at A News, so find me there. You can follow me on Twitter at Sheila Blackadder, and I also have a page on Facebook, Atheist. So,
And Kitch.
there you go.
Yeah, this was a very fascinating discussion. As I said in the chat, I learned today, so
Yeah.
that's always good.
Yeah.
And thanks, and a massive thank you for coming out, CJ.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And
Thank
again,
you very
yeah,
much.
big thank you to CJ. It's been really fun, like probably subject areas I'm not too familiar with, but I've kind of learned quite a bit today, and we hope everyone watching and listening has. Just to remind everyone, if you came in late, this will be uploaded in the next few hours. You'll find it on YouTube. And if you hang on till later on in the week, the audio, we take it away, we send it to our lovely editor who kind of makes it all sound really nice and clean and sparkly and all that. And that'll be Wednesday or Thursday. That usually appears in the podcast feed. And all the links are down below for the Facebook, the Twitter, all that kind of good stuff. So I said, if you have missed anything or if you have any questions, you'll find us all on there and just ask us. And again, a big thanks to CJ, and we're back next week with Dale McGowan. I know, Sheila, you're quite a fan of Dale, so can you give us a little preview of who Dale is and why we should be excited for him?
No, actually, put me on the spot. No,
Yeah.
go ahead. Just know that I'll be here.
Yeah, well, Dale wrote a really cool book, Parenting Beyond Belief. It's kind of a guide for, well, basically secular parenting. And he also wrote The Atheist for Dummies, if I remember correctly. So he's, yeah, really cool
Yeah,
guy.
I think
And,
so,
well, I know Sheila's quite looking forward to that talk anyway. So thanks, everyone. And I don't think there's any more announcements. Marty, Kitch, you don't have anything to announce?
No.
No, sorry.
No, nothing for this one. I am planning to do a Sonic 2 run for the Matter Bandits podcast.
Yeah, just for the Antimatter Bandits, we did a commentary last night. We watched Star Wars Episode 2, and there's a lot of anger in that, basically. So, anyway,
Yeah.
but anyway, thank you everyone for turning out. It's been another fantastic turnout from the audience, and we shall see everyone the same time next week. So, have a really good rest of the weekend wherever you are.
Bye.
Bye, guys.